Good Thursday, Anona, family and friends. Today I want to talk about the good old days. I know I've seen a lot of little things on Facebook and other places where people talk about, the good old days, how great it was. And then they bring up these things like, did you drink out of a water hose? Did you ride in the car without seat belts? Did you play outside until it was dark without any fear, and so forth and so on? And it's all kind of taking us back to, those were the good old days. And sometimes we get nostalgic for the good old days. We think, this today is not so great. We want to go back to the good old days. And the Bible has a couple things to say about that. I'll get into that in a minute. But it's interesting because my siblings and I were talking about this recently. Last weekend during Mother's Day, we went up to Tallahassee, and my mother loves this play in Colquitt, Georgia called Swamp Gravy. And you can Google it, look Swamp Gravy, and you'll find out all about it. But it's a play that's put on every year. It talks about the Southern charm, but it also talks about how life was back in an earlier day. And it kind of looks at how things were tough, things were hard. And that gives us hope for today. Things may be tough and hard. But one of the skits in this last play was this particular item. She said, sometimes we just think about the good old days. And the good old days weren't necessarily always so good. She brought up a number of different things in her little sketch, talking about, yes, technology has changed things, and we think about some of those things, and we really think about them with rose-colored glasses, because it seems like some of the negative things have been kind of sandblasted back in the background. We don't remember those as much because we remember those enjoyable things, those things that filled our lives with pleasure. We don't remember all that stuff that we had to deal with. And I think that's true of us today. There's lots of things about the good old days that I would never want to go back to. They may have been good old days in some ways, but in other ways, they were not so good. And I think you can probably relate to that. So today's first scripture comes from Ecclesiastes 7:10. It says, "Do not say, 'Why were the former days better than these?' For it is not from wisdom that you ask this." See, I think the people back in that time were of the same mind. Sometimes it was always better to think about the good old days. Remember when Moses took the people out of Egypt? Why, once they crossed over from the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, it took them one night to get out of Egypt, but it took them 40 years to get Egypt out of them. And they were grumbling and complaining, "Why did you bring us out here? We should go back into Egypt where we were slaves. At least we knew we had something to eat." You see, the grumbling and the remembering what was good but not remembering what was bad is simply a part of our lives. And the world is changing. Some of us often think the same thing when we think about our church. We think, how much greater it was back in the good old days when the church was doing this, or there was all this activity, or the choir was this, and the youth group was this. And we tend to forget that God has put us here for this day. He didn't put us here for yesterday. He put us here for this day. And so this scripture from Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." You see, even in our day, we think of pre-COVID as the good old days now. And yet there were probably some things that we've learned in the last year that we will never completely go back to the way things were before. As our times change, we are so reluctant to change with them, aren't we? Sometimes it's very difficult. I often remember, hearing stories about my grandparents saying, oh, they had to walk to school in the snow, and it was uphill both ways. And we kind of laugh at that, but, we talk about the good old days, what they were for us. Now, can you imagine what our children, our grandchildren are going to say in a few years? Our grandchildren may be talking to their children and say, oh, do you remember the good old days when we used to drive our vehicles? Now, kids just get them and they go where they take them. We used to be able to drive wherever we wanted. And we lived. And yet they probably don't remember all the accidents that happened on the road because of driver's error. So, the good old days are relative. Our kids will remember these days. Our grandkids will remember these days as the good old days. But let us take heart. The good old days are what we make them now. And that's what this scripture in Proverbs is telling us. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not rely on your own insight. For God has put us here at this time for such a time as this. And our children, God has put them here at this time for such a time as this. If we acknowledge Him, He will give us the strength and the courage to face whatever the days bring us. And I hope that you will find the good old days, you still have plenty of them left ahead of you. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Hope to see you in church this Sunday. And look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.